What a great joy to be here today, to be on this panel, to be discussing such a forefront of, well, the fight against the climate issues we so clearly confront today. My name is Caroline Hyde, Bloomberg television anchor, and I'm very pleased to be now welcoming RJ Scaringe, of course, founder and CEO of Rivian, JB Straubel, co-founder and CEO of Redwood Materials, both managing to scoop out some of the cash that is being offered by what is the Climate Pledge Fund, founded by Amazon. And from Amazon, we're welcoming Ross Raichie, Director of Global Last Mile Fleet and Products. Gentlemen, it is great to have you here. Congratulations, RJ and JB. I want to first and foremost ask you guys, maybe RJ, you can kick us off with your beautiful background where you sit in Illinois with seeing the manufacturing of Rivian products. What sparked Rivian? What really made you take on SUVs, trucks, and electrify them?
Sure, yeah. So when you look at the transportation system today, we're at the very beginning of what needs to be a macro shift away from running our vehicles on carbon-based fuels towards running our vehicles on stored electrons. And to do that, we have to be looking at every segment, whether that's trucks or sedans or commercial vehicles. So Rivian's been focused really in two core areas. One is a set of adventure products, really characterized by trucks and SUVs. That's a consumer-facing brand that really helps to redefine those segments in terms of performance, efficiency, on-road capability, off-road capability. But then also working really in close partnership with Amazon to develop vehicles around last-mile logistics and not just looking at it from an electrification point of view, but also really using it as a chance to rethink the vehicle as it is necessary to be as it is from a features point of view for logistics.
And talking about rethinking vehicles, I mean, I know, JB, you've been doing this a long time. Many will know you not only from Redwood Materials, but co-founder and inaugural CTO over at Tesla. And really, when building Tesla, you realized how much, if we're all going to shift to EVs, this is going to need some mining. And that was an area you were worried about. So talk to us about how you're trying to close the loop and ensure that we can find a more sustainable way of building batteries.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is front and center as the world electrifies and as we, go on this mission to change all of transportation to be powered by electricity. My sort of goal is to find ways that we can make that happen faster by, helping reduce the cost of those batteries that power all this, and also reducing the environmental impact and the footprint of creating those batteries and disposing of them at their end of life.
And it is something we are so viscerally aware of right here, right now. Ross, you are sat in Seattle, where I'm pretty sure when you step outside, the air quality is horrendous. And I know over in Nevada, where you are, JB, this is something that you're having to confront as well, these wildfires. The climate change impact is so real for us right now. Ross, why is this such a priority for Amazon when you're looking at this Climate Pledge Fund?
Yeah, it's a great question. You can see the evidence, every day. I think, Russ, when I think about the Climate Pledge and the Climate Fund, using Amazon scale and demand and investment, I think for me it means you find emerging technologies and you act as a leader and you place really bold bets on those technologies, with the hope of accelerating or galvanizing a product or an industry. I think our partnership with RJ and Rivian is a great example. We've been working to decarbonize our operations for years. To be honest, we've just been relatively underwhelmed with the electric vehicles that were available to us, whether it's range, ergonomics, safety, technology for the driver. And so with Rivian, we found a partner that shares this kind of audacious vision of what an electric vehicle should be capable of. So when you look at our investment in Rivian, when you look at partnering to design a custom electric vehicle, ordering 100,000 of those vehicles, that investment creates a vehicle that I think is going to reset expectations of what electric logistic vehicles are capable of. When drivers get into them every day, they'll be, the safest vehicle they could be in. When it comes into your communities with zero emission, I think you're going to really notice. And so to me, that's, the scale of change we're trying to drive with the Climate Pledge and the Climate Fund.
RJ, 10,000 EVs, I think, by 2022 is what Amazon is going to be looking at. But when you're looking at that sort of level of supply, that level of need, I mean, it must get your juices flowing. You must be so excited, but also in awe of the scale of what is needed right here, right now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's thinking about building and creating a vehicle platform, the technology around it. often I think it's underappreciated how complex the manufacturing system has to be to support that. And the work JB is doing around thinking about supply chain ties right into that. So to build these vehicles, there needs to be hundreds of suppliers making all the components, making the parts. There needs to be the supply chains around those suppliers for the materials, and of course batteries is right at the center of a lot of this. And thinking about the upstream supply is important. And for us, working with existing suppliers, it's really exciting to see some of the things JB is working on to help look at that on a longer term basis in terms of how we can clean that up as well.
RJ, just move to the side a little bit. Give us a sneaky taster of what's going on behind you, because this is your manufacturing plant we're seeing right now. This is what you purchased off Mitsubishi, and now you're making Rivians right behind you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we, rather than sitting behind a white wall, I'm at the plant today, so I had an opportunity to sit in front of a window showing what's really the last station of our production line here, and we're in the middle of what you'd think of as a pre-production or pilot build. And we're building over the next several months, several hundred vehicles before we start delivery. So these are sort of non-saleable pre-delivery vehicles. And these vehicles are being used for testing and validation of our production systems. And just the nature of launching something like this requires all that work to go into making sure it's very robust and the quality systems are in place and the production systems are really working smoothly. So we're in the midst of that, and actually we're wrapping up a whole build process that we've been running for the last couple of weeks today.
And so the money, of course, that's been coming from this fund, how does it get deployed initially, RJ? Is it just funneling what already you had in place, or are you able to expand the scope of what's already being achieved?
Yeah, so we've raised about $6 billion in total to really build the business. And we're launching next year 3 different products. So we have a truck and SUV, which share a lot of content, but they are distinct in different vehicles. And then at the end of the year, we'll begin deliveries on our Amazon vehicle that Ross and I both spoken about. And so to launch 3 vehicles in 1 year, of course, sharing core elements of the platform, battery system, network architecture, drive system, a lot of the compute platforms in the vehicle, these areas we've vertically integrated, helps make launching 3 vehicles in parallel easier. But it is a very large task and requires a team of people that really are committed to moving quickly to put all these pieces together.
A Herculean task that JB knows oh too well, having experienced it, lived it, breathed it, not slept it while over at Tesla, I'm pretty sure. And now, of course, you're still an advisor on that business. You've moved across really focusing now first and foremost on Redwood Materials since 2019. And what, with the money, the funding that you're now going to be getting with Amazon, how are you focused? What's your initial target as it stands as to where you're looking to build out Redwood?
Well, this funding helps us, both scale and also advance the technology, mature the methods that we're using to recover these materials and recycle them. But I think the biggest thing right now is you're really focusing on scale and ramping up. It's amazing in the United States, what a small percentage of consumer electronics devices and lithium-ion batteries get recycled. I don't think most people realize it, but perhaps about 90% of these batteries end up in the landfill today or in the trash stream otherwise. So, I think a really near-term, mission for us is to, reverse that trend and use that as a way to be ready, so that EVs, as they, reach their maturity and end of life, don't have anything, even remotely similar to that, and 100% of them are recycled.
So talk to me about the process of it, JB, because when I'm looking at my phone, and I have used those websites in the past where I send back my old phone, ensure that in some way it's used to be recycled or clean and reselled. But what is it exactly that you're doing? How much of a car battery, for example, can really be recycled using the smartphone that I have in my hand?
Well, batteries are an amazing device because they don't consume any materials. Everything that you build and everything you put in there when you make them, in that factory behind you, RJ, all those materials, stay inside the car for the life of the vehicle. So, even 15 years in the future, when we recycle it, you can recover a very high percentage of those, 90 to 95% of the useful metals in those batteries. And, with appropriate reprocessing, and this is the tricky part, how do you efficiently do that with low labor and lower environmental impact? How can we take those old materials, kind of break them down into their Lego building blocks, and then represent them back into the supply chain so they can feed the front end of a new battery factory and a new EV factory with much lower environmental impact than a new mine could.
I like the Lego analogy. And I think actually the last thing I just got delivered from Amazon, I mean, it's a daily occurrence at my house at the moment, but I think it was Lego or Duplo for my son. And I'm interested therefore, Ross, like how does what JB is currently building work with Amazon's focus? I know you're a man who's focusing on the last mile fleet and products, but what is it that you see could really work in terms of recycling batteries going forward? Oh, I'm not hearing Ross particularly well. Is there a technical issue?
Yeah, no, the technical issue for me, but you got me back.
And there you are. We got you back, Ross. Carry on.
So RJ and I have spent a lot of time speaking about this. I think that end of life part of the product is really exciting and full of opportunities. I know for Amazon, as we go to electrify our operations generally, there'll be a host of natural ways that you can take a battery at the end of its life vehicle use and use it for other applications. Energy storage, right? So talk a lot about closed loop processes. I think that's a core component and an industry that I really think is still to be developed that we're excited to participate in with partners like Rivian and Redwood. And then from recyclability, I think it's having a plan from day one and making sure you scale that plan, like JB said. And so that's something we're looking forward to partnering on. But I think a very solvable piece.
One of the other really interesting things about what we're doing with Amazon is you look at traditional consumer vehicles. These go out into the world, the consumer owns them, and as a manufacturer, you don't have a lot of control over the asset. So you don't get to control how it's charged, you're not able to control how it's serviced. And over the next several decades, as we move from a consumer-facing world into different ownership models, things like subscription or fractionalized ownership, we'll start to see the asset itself be managed or operated, if you will, by more centrally controlled entities increasingly. So you can think about how you charge the vehicles intelligently, how do you service the vehicles intelligently. What Amazon represents with its fleet is really the first very large scale, centrally controlled operation, meaning we can be very deterministic in terms of how we charge the vehicle, how we think about end of life, how we think about predictive and preventative maintenance, and then how we plan for the material usage at end of life, as Ross said. So we've spent actually a lot of time looking at the full life cycle, not just of how the vehicle starts its life, but also then how it exists throughout its life. How do we charge it? How do we service it? And then what do we do with it at end of life? And so, of course, I'm really excited about what JB is doing because we'd love to have these vehicles be a feedstock, and the batteries from these vehicles be a feedstock to then begin another start of life cycle for another set of batteries, another set of vehicles. And the ability to control this essentially as a closed ecosystem allows us to learn and build the muscle memory for this as the whole industry starts to shift not only to electrification, but different methods of consumption as well.
It feels that there's such cross-pollination here, and certainly a need to work with each other and alongside each other. And you've already, both of you, both with Redwood Materials and Rivian, got a very strong relationship with Amazon now. What about some of the other partnerships you're doing? I mean, JB, first and foremost, you've already struck a deal with Panasonic to a certain extent to look at the gigafactory that you helped sort of inaugurate and build over at Tesla, but looking at ways to use scrap parts from there. How important is a relationship like that with Panasonic and with other partnerships going forward?
Yeah, that's a great point. And building batteries today is fairly efficient, and I spent a good portion of my career trying to make that work as well as it possibly could. But in any manufacturing process, there's always a small amount of waste, materials that don't pass the qualification or quality tests. And being able to very quickly recover those and return the value from the materials included is kind of core to our partnership with Panasonic. And fundamentally, that can improve the overall cost structure of making those batteries. So it very directly it returns value and basically saves cost in the battery manufacturing process. So we're really quite excited to work with them on that project. And Panasonic and also Amazon to some extent can represent also partnerships that work in both directions for us. Because Panasonic, of course, is consuming those same materials which they're also in some regard, having to throw away. So, Amazon, through its supply chain, is also doing something similar. And, this is why we're, maybe even more excited to work with, companies like these, where, we can, build a relationship and build, trust over time to figure out how we can, help on both sides of that equation, solving the environmental issues with old products, but also, helping reduce the footprint and improve the sustainability of the new products being made.
And Ross, how do you think about building out your infrastructure to ensure that you can ensure, when you're looking at the last mile delivery in particular, that can be using partners such as Redwood Materials from both your supply side and demand side? That must be an impossible sort of square to circle.
That's a good question. And I think it's interesting, part of making a bold bet in this space is, in a lot of ways, we're a first mover. There aren't a lot of people that have done this at this scale or this pace. If you think about electrifying a material portion of your operations. And so there's a few things we're focused on, right? We're already in the process of deploying hundreds and thousands of electric charging stations and really electrifying our parking spots. For the buildings that we don't have electric parking on site yet, we're actually in the process of getting those buildings ready, getting the plumbing, and you actually have to augment the building design, ahead of that. And then I think the third piece is we're just going to uncover problems that don't have off the shelf solutions. So whether it's charging hardware, charging software, RJ mentioned, tracking a battery over its life cycle so that when we partner with people like what Redwood Materials, you've got this, nice traceability on the battery and what it's gone through. And so we're in the process of building all of those things today. We're trying to do our best to really look around corners and think about what are the problems we'll face in 5 years that we need to be addressing now.
And to that end point, Ross, are there any innovations, trends, things that you're starting to see glimmers of that really excite you in terms of the development of that?
I'm the layperson on the panel, so I'll try to be brief with my answer and let the experts jump in. I think for someone that's only worked in this industry for a few years, I think two things excite me. One, the pace of battery innovation is really exciting. For people that are close to electric vehicles, it's something that I'm looking forward to, seeing. Every year, the batteries become more resilient, more energy dense and lighter, better range, better economics. And we're working with a variety of partners, including Rivian, to really push the edges of what's capable in the battery space. And that's really exciting. I think the second thing is the charging hardware and the ability, to have a flexible ecosystem where the vehicles are, say what you want about gasoline vehicles, but we spent a century building an ecosystem that makes it very easy to operate. You can fuel them anywhere, you can service them easily, etc. So building that charging and energy ecosystem so that when people operate electric vehicles, it's very easy for them. I think there's a ton of innovation left to make that happen, and that's something we find really exciting.
JB, where's the next frontier for you at the moment as you're looking to, I mean, as if you need one, but where is the next iteration that you're looking at when you've already started to think of the life cycle, the way in which you can recycle? What is the next key challenge you're looking to take on?
Well, we're all talking a lot about batteries, and it really is sort of a central technology to so many of these different sustainability initiatives. And for us, we're continuing to look at developing improved battery materials. So not only are we focused on sort of consuming the feedstock of end-of-life devices, but also developing and helping improve some of the performance and characteristics of the outgoing materials that we sell. So I'd say that's kind of the technology frontier of what we're working on, and it is extremely exciting. Batteries are improving steadily and getting better and better, and I think we've passed through the tipping point where electrification is happening. It's inevitable, and there's so many advantages to this for companies like Amazon or retail customers of vehicles. It's incredibly exciting to see, and just very rewarding. I think also I give Amazon credit as a company for looking kind of at the next step of that and trying to make sure you plan the whole ecosystem around that and really prepare for scale.
We're starting to get questions from the audience, which I'm delighted about. Send them in thick and fast. And one of them is actually asking Chris Berry over at Lee Cycle Corp, saying, as this battery technology continues to evolve, how does this inform your planning around recycling processes? JB, is this something that, how easy is this recycling process eventually going to be? And certainly, will I just be able to find a bin that I'll put out weekly in my home that I can put my electrical devices in and off they go, shipped to a company such as yours? How do you envisage it?
Well, it's a great question, and people think of lithium ion as one technology, one chemistry, but in reality, it's a complex family of different technologies. It changes every few years. The chemistries evolve, and the engineer in me, thinks it's great fun. For us, it keeps us on our toes, and we need to stay, nimble and keep innovating, so that as we develop a process, it can stay relevant and can be applicable each time chemistry improves. And I think that that's just an inevitable part of the consumer electronics and really technology world. So to me, that feels kind of very natural. But in the mining industry and where people have historically been very focused on looking at geology, that doesn't change very much. The nature of an ore deposit that's been in the earth is not changing. It's been there for millennia, and I think that's challenging that industry to move at the same pace that they need to and adapt to the sort of pace of technology.
RJ, I've got a question being aimed at you. This person hasn't named themselves, but I'm interested in your products. If anyone's looked at them, the trucks, the SUVs, they're very sexy looking, if I can use that descriptive factor, and also they're pretty expensive. And this particular question, though, comes at the capital cost of electric delivery vehicles. It is higher at the moment versus fossil fuel vehicles. How are you looking at that capital cost curve? Are you going to be able to drive down the costs? Are you going to be able to improve the margins? Do you have to take a hit in terms of margins for the near term?
Yeah, so on the consumer side, we're launching with a set of Halo products, our truck and our SUV, delivering really high levels of performance and capability. As you said, they're very desirable products. And what we've wanted to make sure is that these products really help reframe how consumers think of electrification in these segments. So in the large SUV segment or in the pickup segment. In the case of logistics vehicles or last mile vehicles, it's actually a little different in that the cost per mile benefit from an operating point of view is quite significant, and from an operating point of view, electric vehicles provide a lot of advantages. And what's also interesting is that the vehicles in that space, and Ross alluded to this, are relatively expensive. The combustion-powered vehicles are relatively expensive, such that even from a first price, price out of the box, we're essentially at parity today. And then you take into account the operating cost savings, and it's quite significant. So our view is, what Amazon's done is they're going to really set the bar high in terms of rapid electrification of our logistics systems and logistics networks, I should say. And I think hopefully a lot of others start to follow that path and electrify their fleets as well.
How do you find that balance of providing for the consumer-facing products that you've already sort of shown, we've seen glimpses of, and also when I'm sure you've got as joyous a person as Ross on the phone being like, dude, I'm really hoping to get these as soon as possible. How do you have that sort of relationship and ensure that you can have these sort of deliveries running simultaneously?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So we're launching 3 vehicles next year. We launch our truck, our R1T, our SUV, our R1S, and then Amazon vehicles late in the year. Essentially all in parallel. So while there's a staggered launch, it's all happening within the same 7-8 month period. So with that, the team has been built to support these programs running largely in parallel. But what we've done is we've architected the vehicles such that there's a high degree of shared content. So the battery systems are common across the vehicles. The network architectures and electrical systems are very similar across the vehicles. A lot of shared componentry and content from a drivetrain point of view. But no doubt there is a lot of things happening. Today, our organization is about 2,700 people, ramping up rapidly. But all those folks, all those engineers and manufacturing engineers are working together to get the products together as quickly as possible to get to the market. And as you heard before we kicked off, behind me we have an R1T, And Ross looked at it and said, I wish that was an Amazon vehicle. And I said, wait, just a little bit. But there is, we do have separate lines here within the plant to run those different vehicles.
Yeah,
No,
Ross, how eager are you to see these things?
I'll just put,
go ahead,
very
Ross.
eager. I'll put a plug in. There are hundreds of people at Amazon and Rivian working really hard to bring this vehicle to life. I think we'll be, I can't share all the announcements and surprises today, but we'll be very public in our journey as we work over the next year to get these vehicles on the road at scale. And I think people will be delighted with the progress we're making and how far along we are. I've been really appreciative and inspired by the team at Rivian and just really the pace we've been able.
Thanks, getting Ross. Another question from the audience as well, and it says, can you tell us about battery disposal and recycling as it stands? JB, is that one for you to tell us of how the process used to look like and how it's looking like now for you?
Sure. As I alluded to earlier, unfortunately, a lot of batteries today actually don't get recycled, and that's obviously not the best outcome. Some of these things, unfortunately, can end up in landfills, or they can end up kind of destroyed in a way that might neutralize them but doesn't recover value. That specifically is what we're working to change, to make sure that a battery does not end up in its existing form anywhere it shouldn't. And when we bring a battery into our process, we functionally disassemble it completely. By the time you're done with that, there's really nothing coming out the other end except useful products. And we've set a goal to basically have zero waste, even though our feedstock is waste. To have a zero waste operation, so that we kind of turn every part of that into a product in one way, shape, or form.
And how global does that look at the moment? Because you're obviously sat in Nevada looking at it from the American perspective, but when we look at countries such as China that are really focused on EVs as well, how are you seeing your footprint being able to work across borders?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly this whole effort needs to be global, and the different approaches to recycling and e-waste regulation are quite different in different continents and countries. And they present unique challenges. Batteries also are a bit tricky to transport, and this is certainly why people are building battery factories in different regions and vehicle production factories near their markets. I believe the same is going to be necessary with recycling facilities. We won't be importing batteries from Europe to US or doing something like that. So it needs to be a regional solution, and that's also a more sustainable way to do this. Today these materials travel a ridiculous amount of distance around the world. If you could put a little GPS tracker on something that you mine, an atom of nickel that you mine, the poor thing travels probably 2 or 3 times around the world, before it actually ends up in a product. So it's that in itself has a big environmental impact and a footprint, from all that transportation. So with recycling and this kind of circular supply chain focus, part of our goal is to compress that supply chain, so we can inherently reduce the embedded emissions in these products as they're made.
We have got but only a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to get some blue sky thinking from all of you before we leave, of giving us. I'm going to start with RJ. How close, it's actually a question from the audience, so I thank you for giving us one that really shoots for the stars here. How close are we to a 1,000,000-mile battery, or at least a phenomenal length of time that we can use one battery for? A 1,000,000-mile battery, how many years do you think?
It's an interesting question. I would say today it's some of it's a misconception around the state of where batteries are, in that the batteries today, essentially a properly designed battery pack in a vehicle will outlast the vehicle. This isn't the gating factor. And I think there's a perception that maybe it's because of our experience with consumer electronics or experience with batteries in home devices, that the batteries will age faster than the vehicle ages. The way we're developing our batteries, the way the batteries are going into something like an Amazon vehicle, the vehicle will age out certainly before the battery does, and or age or wear out. And then when the vehicle reaches its end of life, as we said, whether that battery then goes to a second life application for storage, or whether that battery goes to a recycling application, is going to depend on the conditions of the battery at that point. And a lot of what goes into the way you set up the operating parameters of the battery, how it's charged, what the usable voltage range is within the cell, sets up how the cell degrades over time. And in the case of something like an Amazon vehicle, because it's highly deterministic, as I said, because we control how fast we charge it, because we control how we use it over its life, these batteries will last many, many hundreds of thousands of miles, and certainly 1 million miles is something that's possible if that's if that's how the control parameters are managed.
Wow. RJ, quick one from our audience just to finish up on Ford, the relationship there. You're very happy with your strategic alliance there rather than having gone into bed with GM?
So Ford's been a really great partner, and for us, as we've thought about who we're working with between Amazon and our relationship with Ford, it was really important to us that we were aligned philosophically and really aligned in terms of the overall objectives of the business. And I can certainly say that that's the case with both Amazon and with Ford.
And looking at blue sky thinking for both you, JB now, and Ross, what's the next most exciting development you think we're going to hear in the next year on when it comes to battery and EV in the area that you're looking at the moment, JB?
Well, hard to predict exactly what happens in the future, but I think I really am excited about the pace of innovation here and the fact that so many companies are ramping this up. Like what RJ and Rivian are doing, and obviously Tesla's growth. It's an incredibly exciting time in the EV market. So I guess I would look to see so many new models hitting availability in the coming few months to year. It's pretty amazing. If you look back 10 years ago, to imagine that we'd be sitting here today and seeing this pace of growth, it's very exciting.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you all so much for spending time with us today. We want to thank Ross for, of course, selecting RJ and JB to be working alongside with putting money into these endeavors and to seeing such a focus on the climate pledge coming from Amazon. All of you, we thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your days and stay safe amid what is a smoky atmosphere, I'm sure, on the West Coast. Thank you.